What I am going to talk about now is this second pillar of this rooted anti-racist identity that we're working to cultivate. The second portion of these roots deeper than whiteness that we're working to connect to. And that is what a number of you spoke to just now, as having a really powerful impact on you through the homework. And it is this legacy of multiracial struggle in this country for a society that is both free of racial discrimination as well as economic exploitation. And, the truth is that there has always been this hidden yet unbroken legacy of white, Black, and brown people who have come together throughout US history to create a better world. And I really believe that this legacy can, number one, give us hope that change is possible even when the obstacles we face are really overwhelming. Number two, that it can give us knowledge about a strategy that can help us create that change. And number three, that it can, as some folks mentioned, give us a real lineage to find belonging in. And especially at this time of year, right now, where so many traditions tell us that the veil between us and that realm of the ancestors is particularly thin. I think it's, very appropriate, a very appropriate time to delve into this subject. And so I am now going to talk about a few pieces of this history of multiracial struggle and how, no matter if, these pieces of history are parts of our direct ancestry or not, that we can claim this legacy and carry it forward and use it as our strength to do the work that we must do today. And so throughout the 16 and 1700s, at any given time, thousands of white folks were living in tribal communities and multiracial maroon communities on the outskirts of the North American colonies, seeking a better way of life than that which this violent colonial system had to offer. And this continued through the Civil War with the Free State of Jones and other autonomous regions where those who had escaped slavery and those who had defected from the Confederate Army built communities together and struggled to survive together. And the Reconstruction period following the war involved white and Black people writing new state constitutions together that guaranteed voting rights and economic rights and the right to quality public schools. And ending slavery also created the conditions for better labor organizing, because half of the workforce was no longer in chains. And so at this period, we also see the rise of the Knights of Labor, who are a multiracial labor organization that organized industrial workers, as well as tens of thousands of landless farmers to build farming cooperatives throughout the country. And in the late 1800s, as we've talked about, the Populist Party rose to power and brought together poor Black people and poor white people to challenge racism and ruling class power, and they began winning elections throughout the South. And even when their efforts were destroyed by the institutionalization of Jim Crow, some multiracial socialist struggles arose in the early 1900s, and one of which was this amazing, powerful socialist movement of white, Black, and indigenous people in Oklahoma. But when the Socialist Party nationwide would not take a firm stance to challenge racism, the Communist Party began to do so, and they became increasingly multiracial and increasingly committed to challenging white supremacy as a part of this process of uniting and liberating the working class as a whole. And my great uncle, Ben Lauderdale, was a central part of the Communist Party of Texas. And unlike what J. Edgar Hoover And, Joe McCarthy would like us to think the Communist Party in the South at this time was not trying to create some totalitarian state. Though they were not perfect, they were ultimately trying to replace this fascist Jim Crow system with a multiracial democracy. And on December 13th, 1930, my Uncle Ben wrote this article in the Southern Worker newspaper that was called "Cannot Wait 50 Years, but must Fight the Lynch Now." And in his article, he called on communist defense teams to confront lynch mobs when they arose in their communities. And he closed the piece by saying, "May the Communist Party ever stand irrevocably pledged to the principle of full economic, political, and social equality for all the races of mankind, and require each and every member of the party to live up to the slogan." And 10 years later, he was the 1940 Communist Party candidate for governor of Texas, running with a multiracial slate of candidates as part of a Black, white, and Mexican political organization that used solidarity-based organizing to unite the working class. And it should also be noted that throughout this period, communists also around the country became key organizers in workplaces and gained serious influence in almost half of all unions throughout the country. And they contributed enormously to building enough power in the labor movement to finally force the hand of the US government to pass the New Deal. And they also did a huge amount to make so many labor unions racial justice focused. And there were also other related cross-racial labor organizing efforts, including the Southern Tenant Farmers Union, which was organized by the Socialist Party and was gaining traction during this same time. And these anti-racist strains of the labor movement were in many ways the birthplaces of the civil rights movement, which, unlike we're often taught, many scholars have described as a multiracial workers' movement that brought people together to challenge both discrimination and to fight for economic justice. And as we've talked about, there was the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, the Poor People's Campaign. This is a photo of children at a free breakfast program of Chicago's Rainbow Coalition, which you learned about in your study materials. That included the Black Panthers and the Young Patriots and others. And last time in our last session, when we spoke about what has happened over the last 45 years, how coded racism has been used as this fuel for a corporate takeover of US democracy, and how corporations have even infiltrated parts of the left and sought to divorce racial justice activism from class struggle and to break up those working class multiracial coalitions. And it's important to note that process, all of those processes didn't just happen out of the blue, right? They were a clear response to this long legacy of multiracial organizing, a legacy that held tight to that radical analysis of racism that we spoke about in our last session. And so it's important to realize that if we can reconnect to this legacy, we can also find a lot of political insight for dealing with many of the challenges that we're facing today. And in 1945, the Communist Party of Texas didn't run candidates, but they still put out a platform. And I've taken 3 quotes from this platform that I think are really representative of this legacy as a whole, and that can offer us 3 principles of solidarity-based organizing, a way of talking about these issues to build solidarity in our polarized society. And the first quote is, "The Negro people in Texas live in a concentration camp of oppression, terror, and intimidation. Economically, they are at the bottom of the ladder. Politically, they are denied their rights. Socially, they are segregated and Jim Crow." So always speaking about the issue of racism, right? Never sacrificing that because you think it'll push white people away, because that doesn't have to be the case. And in the case of the Communist Party, leaders forefronted racial justice specific demands and didn't tolerate overtly racist acts of white members at all. And some chapters even put members directly in racial justice education courses. But ultimately, the pathway, the core of the pathway to white learning and growth was not opened with any sort of guilt trip. It was opened by showing them their stake in it and illustrating that the racist lies that they had been taught were meant to keep them from seeing the real causes of their suffering. And the second quote is, today, as the workers, the farmers, the small businessmen of Texas are faced with a brutal attack on their living standards by big business, the agents of monopoly capital are agitating the white people for a civil war against the Negro people in order to divert them from a united struggle against monopoly capital. And so this phrase, show them the trick, is from activist and reverend and coalition builder William Barber. And what that means is illustrating to all people, but particularly to white folks, how they are being pitted against people of color for their own demise, and illustrating the connection between white supremacy and the corporate domination of all working people, the entire 99%. And notice that this message doesn't label the masses of white people as the root of all evil or the root of this mass problem that we're in, but it actually speaks to the real roots and gives them a message that can lead to actual behavior change, and did lead to massive behavior change. And lastly, inspiring with the message of shared liberation. The white workers will have long hours and poor pay until the Negro people are free. So organizers constantly reiterated that message that we need each other, that, as Fannie Lou Hamer said, nobody's free until everybody's free. And one of the most central members of the Communist Party in the US was a man named William Patterson. And he was a lawyer who wrote a lot about political strategy and who defended many persecuted activists and people of color. And he's most known for successfully defending the Scottsboro Nine, who were a group of Black young men, all teenagers, who were falsely accused of attacking two white women and were on death row for a long time. And he kept going until the end of his career, where in the 1970s, he supported the defense of Angela Davis. And in the early 1950s, in 1952, he became a mentor to a woman named Anne Braden. And Anne Braden was a young white racial justice activist struggling with guilt and confusion about her role in the movement. And what William Patterson told her was that she could join what he called the other America, which was that unbroken legacy of multiracial struggle for a better world. The legacy of white people who gave their allegiance to justice rather than white supremacy, despite constant attempts of the powerful to turn them against their allies of color. And what he told her was that whether it was her biological heritage or not, that she could claim this and she could find home here. And that is what Anne did. And for the next 50 years, she went on as an advocate for racial and economic justice and spoke time and time again about how the other America kept her grounded and was an essential part of her identity, and how it was what she called her spiritual home. And I'll close by saying that I myself have struggled a lot with overwhelm in these last 8 or 9 months with this pandemic with this massive economic crisis, with police violence towards Black folks and activists, with waking up one day to total darkness when, because there was so much smoke in the sky out here in California. And now with this upcoming election that is bringing about so much stress. And what has helped me ground myself more than anything amidst all this has been diving into this history and realizing that these people kept going, like some folks said earlier, in the face of incredible difficulty, in the face of the bondage of indenture and enslavement, in the face of vigilante mobs that could attack without warning. Like my Uncle Ben had his house burned to the ground by the Klan. Um, these people organized in the face of Jim Crow, in the face of the Great Depression, in the face of FBI surveillance, and in the face of McCarthyism. And they kept going amidst all of that, and accomplished a whole lot. And that helps me stay connected to the belief that we can accomplish things too, and we can get through this too, no matter what is coming our way. And so I encourage all of us to keep this legacy of the other America close, to find belonging there, and to draw on it to both find political understanding as well as, the spiritual strength that we need to take on the challenges in front of us today. And so thank you, everybody. That is what I have for you. And let's all take a breath together to take all that in. And now we are going to go into our breakout group.